Good morning, Clemens. Clemens Ladenburger, Deputy Director General in the Legal Service of the European Commission, long-standing colleague, and therefore a big thank you for your time this morning.
Good morning, dear Johan.
And the issue we are talking about is the European Union and its very fundamental basics. And one of them, of course, is that the European Union is a rule-based organization. But that meaning has so many elements, but I'm sure you would like to mention and highlight one or the other that in this context is of essential importance.
Yes, so good morning again, dear Johan. I'm privileged to take part through this interview in your course. Of course, what I say is expressed in a personal capacity. It does not bind the institutions. So the European Union as a rules-based organization, as a community based on the rule of law. This is a concept which was coined for the first time in 1962 by Walter Hallstein, Rechtsgemeinschaft, community based on the rule of law. What it really encapsulates is this beautiful idea that European integration aims on the European continent to replace the law of the strongest by the strength of the law. And the European Union is putting that in action. Then rule of law has been used by the European Court of Justice since 1986 as a legal concept. And when we look more closely at it, it has two components. On the one hand, it conveys the idea that the European Union essentially acts through the law. We don't have an army, we don't have a big centralized administration. We have legislation, we have the treaties, we have the law, and we bind our member states to respect of that law. So the law is the essence of how we conduct our European policies. EU budget has become more and more important over time, but still is ridiculously small when you compare it to national budgets. So this is one component. And the second component is that a community based on the rule of law also has material requirements on what we do. We must respect the rule of law. This has been concretized over the years. And the most important concretization I would like to mention exists since 2021 in what we call the conditionality regulation, which binds member states to certain concepts of the rule of law. And when they violate those concepts, then for the protection of the Union's own budget, the Commission and the Council can step in. Very briefly, what are these essential concepts or emanations of the rule of law? It means the principles of legality implying transparent, accountable, democratic and pluralistic lawmaking, legal certainty, prohibition of arbitrariness, effective judicial protection by independent and impartial courts, separation of powers, non-discrimination, and equality before the law. So to sum up, this is what we today understand by the rule of law in the European Union.
So thank you very much, Clemens, because you have shown that there was quite a development in further defining the rule of law and also what are the democratic rules behind it. Have we overcomplicated now, especially when we think about countries that are adhering to the Union? Has it become more complicated for them to adhere to all the rules, or is that a false impression?
That is a false impression. Thank you for the question. And here it is essential that I stress that this common core concept of what the rule of law entails, which I just summarized to you, now is encapsulated in this regulation of 2021, but the very same list of core components had been developed by the Venice Commission from 2011, and that is an organ of the Council of Europe, pan-European, of constitutional experts who have found consensus. So the European Union is not inventing its own concept of rule of law, but is basing itself on this work of a very, very prestigious pan-European assembly, which defined those very concepts in 2011 and then again in 2016. Moreover, in whatever we do as European Commission, we take into account that member states, also future member states, have a legitimate diversity in their own constitutional understandings of the rule of law. And we don't encroach on those. We only look at the core common value. And to give you one example, perhaps amongst the most important core common values is judicial independence, the independence of judges, which means that there must be appointment procedures that put beyond question for the citizens that those judges can act independently. However, how then our member states do appoint judges, there are lots of different models, and we don't harmonize them. We respect them. Right? But they have to be construed, taken together in such a way that people coming to the judges have no doubts about the independence of those judges. Just to give this example. Democracy. Yeah, so if I may, democracy, there is a big variety in our member states about exactly how to organize democracy and what it means. But the treaty has only again identified for the European Union some core. The principle of representative democracy, which is for the European Union the main thing, but also participatory democracy for the citizens in the EU affairs themselves, which, for example, has been operationalized through the European Citizens Initiative in the treaty. On democracy, all in all, we have less of a concretization of its core elements than for the rule of law at pan-European level. There is more variety on what democracy can mean in concrete terms. But it always means ruling for a limited period of time with the possibility of citizens to vote, to oust a government, to change the rule, and to bring in other people. But that's only the core.
Thank you so much for these very helpful explanations. And just for those who are participating in the course in the special lecture on the rule of law, we will dive a bit more deeper in the history and many other elements. Clemens, if you allow, I would have a question that is not totally in line with what we are discussing here, and I return with my last question in a moment back to it. But nevertheless, there is a vivid debate ongoing about the possibilities to, let's say, shape the current European Union and its ways of functioning, respecting the current Lisbon Treaty, but still allowing for certain modifications. That discussion probably for newcomers is very complicated, but I'm sure you can shed a bit of light on one or the other element that you would mention where the Lisbon Treaty would allow to make amendments without necessarily going through the heavy procedure of a full treaty amendment or treaty change.
Indeed, that is a very, very important discussion for the future. And to keep things simpler, I would perhaps just mention 4 elements. The first is what in our jargon we call the passerelle clauses of the treaty. What this means is that the treaty allows the Council or the European Council, without treaty change, but by unanimity, to make qualified majority voting applicable instead of unanimity. This is the first element. And to give you one example, the European Commission has proposed in the past to use this for the area of common foreign and security policies, but not for everything, obviously, but for targeted elements. For example, human rights international positions, also sanctions, now highly relevant in the EU's reaction to Russia's war of aggression to Ukraine. This is the first element. The second element would be to other clauses in the treaty that allow to extend the competencies a little bit without treaty change. Again, one relevant example is harmonization of criminal law. The treaty has a list of areas of crime for which the Union can harmonize, but it allows, by unanimity, the Council to extend this list. This has now been done for the first time, again in the context of Russia's war against Ukraine, because we have created a new harmonized crime of evading sanctions. This is very important because this allows then also judges in the EU more easily to expropriate frozen assets. Second example, already used, and there's more potential to use it. Third example, very important, the EU's external relations. The treaty allows the European Union, without treaty change, to create a common European defense by unanimous decision-making. And the fourth element is what I would call constitutional practice, to give an innovative reading to the treaty. And again, the main example that we see already starting in action is that the European political parties appoint Spitzenkandidaten, lead candidates, for the office of Commission President. They can do that. The treaty does not stand in the way of this. But of course, the treaty did not contemplate that either. The treaty would also allow one day, if there is political will, to create a system of transnational list for European elections. So these are some of the ideas and possibilities to further reform the European Union without a formal amending treaty procedure.
Excellent, this outlook. And if you allow, with the concluding question, I would return to a historical moment that even was very important in your life and still has a lot of bearings for today. And that was your involvement in drafting the Fundamental Rights Charter of the European Union. Now, I'm sure you have maybe some important, but maybe also some funny moments or interesting moments to share with us.
Oh yes, yeah. This brings me back indeed to the beginning of my career in Brussels as a young lawyer. And what I want to convey is that when this started in the year, it was December 1999, in fact, a convention was created to draft the charter. This was highly innovative because in the past, treaty reforms had always been agreed only in intergovernmental conferences, with government officials bound by instructions sitting around the table and trying to find agreement on new drafting. And that is a very cumbersome procedure because officials are bound by instructions, always have to report back. Here, it was at the time the idea of the German presidency, but somehow all the European Council agreed. a convention was convened composed of 63 people with one president. The European Council said the president has to be Roman Herzog, former German federal president. And the composition was totally innovative because there were one representative per member state, but those could be independent personalities. Then there was a delegation of the European Parliament, and there was a delegation of national parliamentarians, 2 per member state. Plus there was a European commissioner, and I worked for the then European commissioner. This format created a totally new dynamic because of the parliamentarians, because they worked like parliamentarians do, and they wanted to advance. This made it possible within 9 months to come up with a Charter of Fundamental Rights of 54 articles. And while we were doing this, we were always saying to ourselves, an intergovernmental conference in those 9 months would still be stuck with Article 3. And here it was because it was an open public debate. And so also the government officials came under pressure from the parliamentarians to agree to a sensible Charter of Fundamental Rights. That's the gist of what was then become known as the convention method. And it was so successful that in the year 2002, it was again used for the big constitutional convention, out of which came the draft constitution, ultimately the Lisbon Treaty. And it is now enshrined in the EU treaties for major treaty reforms. Interestingly, our member states are not all so keen to use it again, because they know that once you convene a convention, there will be many ideas and a dynamic process will emerge, and it may lead to far-reaching results. So this is the convention method. I helped develop it myself. I lived through it. And it was a fascinating moment because of some miraculous understanding between the convention members. It became possible within 9 months to proclaim a consensus on a text of a charter. Officials would never have managed to agree on such a text.
Fantastic. Thank you very much with looking back at a cornerstone of how the union is organized and is also looking after these very important principles for every single citizen of the union. Thank you very much, Clemens, for your time.